Some people say we all came from the waters, and others say from deep inside the earth. Some say that we were sent from other planets, and from the light of the sun and stars we were given birth. But you're the fire of creation, the breath of the eternal, the rhythm in our hearts, and your words upon our tongue. Your music fills our songs and moves our feet to dancing, and gives us joyful wisdom that from you we have come. It's from you we have come. Some say we're from a cradle of civilization, and others from the most beautiful garden on earth. Some say a bird from heaven delivers our children to the mothers and fathers who long to give them birth. But you're the fire of creation, the breath of the eternal, the rhythm in our hearts, and the words upon our tongue. Your music fills our songs and moves our feet to dancing, and gives us joyful wisdom that is from you we have come. From you we all have come. This precious gift of life is a wondrous treasure, with no way to express our thankfulness. The beauty of your grace we cannot measure, nor the greatest gift of all, your blessed love. For you're the fire of creation, the breath of the eternal, the rhythm in our hearts, and your words upon our tongue. Your music fills our songs and moves our feet to dancing, and gives us joyful wisdom that is from you we have come. From you we all have come. We all are of the one, all of the
Can't turn this thing off. Om Asato Ma Sadagamaya Tamaso Homaham Jyotirgamaya Mrityurmam Amritam Gamaya Avir, Avir, Maedhi, Rudra, Yatte, Dakshinam, Mukha, Tena Maham, Pahinityam. Om. Lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness unto light. Lead us from death to immortality. Reach us through and through ourselves, and evermore protect us from ignorance by thy sweet, compassionate face. Yeah, I don't need that. Oh, okay. So my subject this morning is the story of creation. And we're going to be talking about the cycle of involution and evolution. And this morning I am going to be giving you a religious worldview, not a materialist worldview. In the beginning, there was the self in the form of a cosmic man floating on the ocean of infinite consciousness. His eyes were closed, but he was not asleep. He was absorbed in the bliss of samadhi. And out of the center of his being, there grew a lotus. And that lotus rose and floated on the ocean waters. The petals opened, and there in the middle sat the great four-faced Brahma, the creator of this world. And Brahma looked to the north and to the south and to the east and the west, and he realized that he was alone, and he became afraid. And that's why sometimes when we're alone, we feel afraid. But then he looked around and he thought, there is no one other than myself. And he became fearless. And so too it is with us, that if we realize that there is none apart from ourselves, we become fearless. And Brahma closed his eyes and began to meditate on the Vedas, the vast, infinite sum total of all true knowledge, the sum total of all true propositions, that is, content of God's mind, omniscient mind. And in his meditation, he realized and understood what he had to do. And he thought, I will create worlds. And how did he do that? And he held up his hand, and on his hand he felt some molecules of touch. And he called them Sparshatan Matra, the essence of touch. He opened his eyes and he looked very carefully and he saw some faint forms. They were thought forms. And they had some color. And he called them Rupa Tanmatra, the essence of form. And now he had three of the great subtle elements. And he tasted the prasad offered to God. And he became aware of those flavor particles. And he called them rasa tanmatra. And he knew the essence of taste. And he smelled the fragrance of the incense. And he called it gandha tanmatra. And he knew the essence of smell. And so he had the 5 great subtle elements, and he entered into them. But the 5 elements are not enough, subtle elements are not enough to create this physical world. And so he took the sound, and out of the sound, he pulled space. And, well, that makes sense because sound, every sound that we hear is caused by 2 things touching together. And for your hands to clap together, they have to be apart. That is, there has to be space between them. And so space was the first of the great gross elements. And he took space, and into the space, he put some touch particles. And from that, he pulled out air. And we know that makes sense, because air moves through space, and we can feel it as it touches our bodies. And then he took the air, and from the air, he added some molecules of shape and color. And from that, he pulled out fire. And we know the fire, well, it makes a sound, and it has a shifting forms, and it appears before us with a bright color. And then he took the fire and he added some molecules of taste to it, and he pulled out water. And now he had water, the 4th of the 5 great gross elements, as taste. Some people say water's tasteless. No, water tastes like water. And he took the water, and he added to it some smell particles. And out of that he pulled the Prithvi Mahabhuta, that is the earth's element. And now he had the 5 gross elements, and he entered into them. And then he was immersed in meditation on the Vedas. Now the Vedas speak of 14 worlds, 7 below and 7 above. And there are many other worlds. And so Brahma first created the solar sphere. That is this world in which we live. The sun is shining, and the planets revolve around the sun. This is the world of the gross Mahakasha, physical space. And then he created the lunar sphere, which is the abode of the gods, where matter and energy, see, in this gross world, well, matter is gross and is heavy and tangible. Energy is physical. In the lunar sphere, the forms are not physical forms, they're thought forms, and they're moved by psychic forces. And then he created the electric sphere, in which matter and energy you can't hardly tell them apart, like in lightning. And the matter and energy are almost the same. And then he created the Brahma Loka, the highest of the worlds of meditation. And having created those worlds, he entered into them, and then he meditated on the Vedas. And in the Vedas, Brahma is called Prajapati, the creator of living things. And so he contemplated these worlds, and in the worlds he created plants, and he created living things, living animals, and all of mankind. And he entered into them. And thus it was that the cosmic man created this world and entered into it and became all that is, from Brahma down to a blade of grass. So that's the story of creation. And maybe we can take some time to contemplate some of the lessons or some of the understanding that we can get from this narrative. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, by God, we can see that in Vedanta, God has two modes: impersonal and personal. The impersonal God is called Ishvara. I called him the cosmic man, the Purusha. The Ishvara is the sum total of all beings in the universe. We can't call him a person. Maybe we could call him a meta-person. He abides in pure, impersonal existence, knowledge, and bliss absolute. He cannot create anything. In order to create worlds, you need movement, you need action, you need multiplicity. And therefore, you need a personal God. The personal God in the narrative is Brahma. Brahma is the creator. He's personal because he has a name, and he has a form. And we can visualize the form of Brahma, and we can say his name. Ishvara is not the name of the impersonal God. That's just a title that means the all-powerful. Brahma is a manifestation of Ishvara. He's an aspect. He is a function of Ishvara. And it's his role and it's his job to create the world. And mythology tells us that this Brahma was at one time a person, like ourselves, who did spiritual practice for thousands of years. And in the course of time, he became the greatest of all of the spiritual achievers on the earth. And as a result of which, when he died, he was gifted by Ishvara with the highest place of the creator of the world. Now Brahma first meditated on the Vedas. The Vedas. And by the Vedas, we don't mean the books, Rig Veda, Yajur Veda, Sama Veda. We don't mean those books. By the Vedas here is meant the sum total of God's knowledge. That is the sum total of all true propositions. God is omniscient. The content of his omniscient knowledge, usually explained as propositional knowledge, the knowledge of all true propositions. And he meditated on that knowledge which existed eternally, before creation, incorruptible, and beyond space and time. So before Brahma appeared, that knowledge existed. And so he meditated upon that knowledge in order to understand how to create the world. Now, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, when we say created there, we mean, well, when we say in the beginning, we say first in the beginning God created it. What we mean by in the beginning, when we think of beginning, those of us raised in a Judeo-Christian tradition, we usually think of a straight line with a start and an end, a beginning and an end. That's linear thinking. Whereas in Eastern wisdom, everything moves in a cycle, in a circle. So there is no beginning, really. It's just a cycle. Cyclic time. So when we say in the beginning, in the narrative, what we really mean is the beginning of a cycle. And Brahma, like ourselves, has a life cycle. During the day of Brahma, the world, this world, all these worlds are manifest. And at night, when he falls asleep, the worlds become unmanifested, just as it does in our experience. The only difference is that there's a time dilation effect. And for Brahma, one day is equal to like 7,000 eons of life on Earth, like it's millions and billions of years. So we have this idea of cosmic time. Now, Brahma lives for 100 years. And each day, the worlds become manifest. At night, they dissolve and become unmanifested. That is, the lower three worlds, if we're speaking here of 7 worlds above, the lower 3 worlds go through that process of that daily life cycle. However, at the end of his life, when Brahma dies, all of the worlds become unmanifested. That's called Mahapralaya. Pralaya every day and night. Mahapralaya. At the end of the life cycle of the creator of this universe, he will die, and then he will be liberated, and another Brahma will take his place. And so we see this great cycle of time. Now, we said that in the beginning, God created this heavens and earth. And we can look here at the word more closely. Created. Created. Usually when we think about creation, we think about creation out of nothing. and which is incomprehensible in Indian philosophy. There is no creation out of nothing. And in fact, the word that we use loosely as creation, because in common parlance we call it creation, really the Sanskrit word is shrishti, which means, literally it means the outbreathing of God. Swami Vivekananda translates it as projection. Therefore, technically, there is no creation here in the sense of something being created out of nothing, something being created anew. Rather, it is projection. It is of something which is already in a potential form, is just becoming a manifest form. It's being actualized. And the analogy given in the Upanishads is that of a spider who spins a beautiful web out of threads that come from her own body. She projects those threads, spins the web, and then manages the whole web like a housekeeper. She can go anywhere that she wants, any intersection on the web. She can scamper there and clean everything up. And so she has projected this world. So it is that the God has really projected the world, manifested the world out of his own being. Ishvara is the material cause. Brahma is the efficient cause. Now we say the Brahma has projected this world. What we mean when we say that, we mean that it's manifested. Maybe it's natural for us to think in terms of, think of like a seed. Think of Brahma as a farmer who presides over a great field. That is, the whole of creation is like a field. And in the field, there are planted millions and billions of seeds. And the sun is shining, and the rain falls, and the seeds begin to grow. And what does the farmer do? Well, he presides over the field. He really, after all the seeds are planted, he doesn't really have to do anything. He's like the boss in the office, maybe. Doesn't really have to do much. He just has to be there. And then everything works according to the natural plan. Swami Vivekananda puts it a little differently, different versions of how we can conceptualize the process of creation. Brahma first manifests as name, and then as form. Name and form is a technical term of art in Vedanta. And we'll talk about it more in detail in some future lecture on the subject of creation from the Word. But in the beginning, there is name, is the name. Brahma first manifests as name, and then as form. What does that mean? That means is that, well, we can say that Brahma is like a man who's given a shopping list by his wife, and on the shopping list he sees there's one carton of milk and a dozen eggs and one loaf of bread. And so what does he do? He goes to the market and he gets an empty basket and he goes up and down the aisles and he gets the items into the basket. And he comes out And he checks out, and now he has everything is in the basket. His wife sees those items, she's very happy. He's manifested those items. There was nothing in the basket in the beginning. Now there's something in the basket. That is, that which was unmanifested became manifested. And all the things that still remain in the supermarket after he's left now remain unmanifested. The only things that were actualized were the things that Brahma has on his list. Now, this whole story of creation is a figurative description of an ancient philosophy. In fact, of the Sankhya cosmology. What is the Sankhya cosmology? Well, it is the oldest philosophy in the world. It's the first philosophy in the world. Kapila, who's the formulator of the Sankhya system, was the first person ever to dream up a philosophy. That is a systematic worldview. And the beauty, and Swami Vivekananda, it's incorporated into the Vedanta philosophy and assimilated into the Vedanta philosophy. And Swami Vivekananda gave 2 major lectures on Sankhya cosmology. Sounds strange to our ears, but it's important for us helpful for us to acquaint ourselves with this philosophy, because it approaches the whole subject of philosophy purely from a rational standpoint. No reference to any Sanskrit scriptures. You don't have to believe in the Vedas. You don't have to believe in any Hindu scriptures. It's all just rational thought. And so it's a stepping stone for us to come to the Vedanta philosophy. But let's look here at this Sankhya cosmology and see 3 things that we can learn. That's part of the story of creation. The cosmology, as you can see from the story, it begins there with from the causal to the subtle to the gross. It begins with intelligence. It posits a pure consciousness, and over and apart from that, there is pure intelligence. And out of intelligence comes subtle matter and mind. And out of mind comes matter. Now that's what sounds very strange to our ears, because we're used to thinking of it being the other way around, and it's true. That's one of the lessons we can learn from Sankhya cosmology, that how does creation happen? It's a top-down process. It's not a bottom-up process. It goes from the causal to the subtle to the gross, not from the gross to the subtle to the causal. Second thing we can learn from Sankhya is this is all about a cosmos. This is a cosmology of how the macrocosm evolves, but the principles also hold true for the microcosm. And that the microcosm mirrors the macrocosm. So we have here a great holographic model of the nature of the universe. And we can learn another thing, and that is that intelligence creates mind, creates matter. You see, there's no mind-body problem. The whole of Western philosophy is defined by the problem of how mind becomes matter, how consciousness emerges from matter. In Indian philosophy, these problems don't exist. Why? Because intelligence and mind and matter are all the same thing. They're all part of nature, prakriti. It's all the same stuff. So there's no problem of things which sound mental and which sound causal and spiritual becoming physical. Now we can see here in the Sankhya cosmology, it goes from the causal to the subtle to the gross. Now there's an analogy that helps us to understand this. It's given in the Bhagavad Gita, the 15th chapter. Urdhvamulam madashakam ashwatam prahuravyam. The whole chapter is chanted on every possible occasion by monks of the Ramakrishna order, beginning with that first verse, with the first line, which I quoted, which says, "There is an eternal Ashwatha tree." That's the first words. Now, the Ashwatha tree we know from our study, if you're acquainted here, the life of Sri Ramakrishna, and you know the Panchava tree, the banyan tree. That's an Ashwatha tree. It's a kind of a fig tree that grows, the branches grow, and the roots come out of the branches and goes down and form new trunks of new trees and can form a whole forest out of one tree. It's a kind of a fig tree. Now the fig is a genus, and the scholars say that the tree in the Garden of Eden, it was not an apple tree. It was probably a fig tree. Similarly, we read in the life of Buddha, the Bodhi tree, we know, is Ficus religiosa. That is, it was a fig tree. It was a variety of Ashwatha tree. So that's a favorite illustration. Now, in the verse in the Bhagavad Gita, it says that there is an eternal Ashwatha tree with its roots above and its branches below. That's the first line. And we say, well, what a strange image. A tree growing with its roots coming out of heaven, coming down, and the branches and the leaves, the tips of the leaves just barely touching the earth. And we may think, well, that's... how can we understand that? Well, for one thing, we know that whenever you see an object, the light from the object, this is just optics, the light from the object will strike the photoreceptors in the retina of your eye. And the image that it forms in the eye is upside down. And when you say, well, why don't we see things upside down? Well, because we don't see the image in the eye. We see the object in the world. But it's just an interesting factoid that, well, okay, if we have a tree which upside down, let's turn it right side up. Now, once we turn it right side up, immediately we can say, oh yes, we can recognize that tree. I know that tree very well. It's the tree of life. Finds expression in all religions, all cultures, every in many different domains of knowledge. That's a graphic organizer for evolution. Now notice the first part of our story here is all about involution. Things are cycling downwards and becoming involved. Now the story just changed. Now the story is about the tree of life that is growing upwards. And maybe the most common image of that tree of life that we can think of is those of, if you remember your high school biology class, first graphic in there is going to be the phylogenetic tree. where we learned about evolution of biological life on the earth and how it goes from the kingdom to the phylum, to the order, to the class, the trunk and the branches, and the family and the genus and the species that would go way up at the top of the tree, the little twigs and the little buds at the top of the tree, those are the species. Back the twigs, those are the genus. We can go back and trace it back to, so we have an image there of evolution. Now that's on a cosmological scale. That's on the bioevolution of the biosphere. But the same holds true as for ourselves as an individual. We grow like a tree. We can say I think it's a close analogy that the soul is like a seed. It's planted in the earth. We have roots that go into the earth. Those roots are our samskaras and our vasanas. As we grow, the trunk of the tree is the trunk of our body. The limbs of the tree are the limbs of our body. The sap of the tree is the life force that flows through us. And as we grow, our minds and hearts begin to experience proliferation of the branches, become more and more diverse, become more and more indefinable. People in ancient times, used to worship trees. Why is that? Because when you look up into the branches of a huge, glorious tree, it spreads out, and you can't see the outline. That is to say, it's not a finite outline. It's infinite. That is, it suggests to the person that infinity. It's an actual perception of infinity. And so it is. A tree is always considered to be sacred. Trees are sacred, if only because they grow upward. They seek out from the earth. They reach up towards heaven and towards the gods. So now we have two images. We have the image of the tree above, roots above, and then in the tree of life, the roots below. Sounds almost like a contradiction. But the beauty of Indian philosophy is that it shows us that this is a great cycle that moves forward and downward and inward and upward. You can see of a tree as it grows up into the fruits and the flowers, and then it produces the fruits and then the seeds, and the seed falls to the ground, and what we have is the cycle of life. On a macrocosmic scale, we call it the great wheel of birth and death, the great cycle of transmigration. On a microcosmic scale, it is a cycle of our own understanding. Each one of us, we have a teleology. That is, we have a history. We have a development. And there are two phases to our development. That is, there is involution and there's evolution. And in order to understand, certainly now we are as we are interested in self-development, in self-evolution, but it's not possible for us to understand the why of our evolutionary quest, the why, unless we understand the backstory, why we are what we are. See, you take an example. You can take an example of a fish like the salmon. If you take a salmon fish and you were to observe it for most of its life, it lives in the salt waters of the ocean. And then you would be surprised if you were to just watch that salmon. What does it do? Well, it goes to a river, and then it starts to swim up that river and up these small creeks back to a freshwater pond. How bizarre, how strange. We can't understand that whole process unless we know the backstory. That is, we have to know that salmon was born in that place. That was his source. That's why it makes sense that the cycle is being completed. That's why they tell the Christian Bible, they tell the story about the prodigal son. Prodigal son, as he's distanced from the Father in heaven, goes out into the world and he suffers, and then he returns again to the Father. The whole story makes sense, the great return, and we understand the unconditional love of the Father, lost and found. And so similarly it is in our lives. We're engaged in spiritual practice. We're struggling onward and upward to return. Key word there is return. How do we understand it? Return. Return to what? Return to our source. Why are we struggling onward and upward like the tree, reaching up to heaven? Why does a tree reach up to heaven? Because that's where it came from. And so the story of creation is part of a great cycle. It's part of the cycle of story. A story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Today, we're somewhere in the middle. We've fallen from heaven, and we're in this world of samsara, and we are struggling to return. Our involution began with God. Our evolution will end with God. And the goal and purpose of our life is to realize God and return to our source.
Red wings fill this heart with blue sky. Whispers in the winds take messages to far friends. Great Spirit watches over them. Great Spirit watches over them. Sun shines on beginnings. Bright new days, Great Spirit watches over them. Great Spirit watches over them. He watches over them. He watches over them.
Swami Dhyana Yogananda from Trabuco will speak next Sunday, April 3rd. Yeah. Om Dyo Shantihi Antariksha Ham Shantihi Prithvi Shantihi Apa Shantihi Oshadaya Shantihi Vanaspataya Shantihi Vishwe Deva Shantihi Brahma Shantihi Saravam Shantihi Shantireva Shantihi Sa Me Shantiredhi Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. Om. Peace is in heaven, peace is on the earth, peace is in the sky and in the waters. The herbs and plants and trees are full of peace. The gods are peaceful. May this eternal universal peace enter our souls and beings. Om. Peace, peace, peace be unto us all.